Holy shit, I'm in a talkative mood. Back in the car, back in the motorway, and I was just running through my head about what I had said in the previous podcast about anxiety, because I remember it's only within the last 2 or 3 years, I think, maybe slightly longer, that I actually realised what anxiety was. And kind of looking back over my last recording, I hope my kind of description of anxiety, or should I say File Arms and Hog's description of anxiety, laid bare in their anxiety game, or their anxious game, or whatever the fuck it was called. I think that's a great example, because people have asked me over the years, this is all kind of coming back to me, people have asked me, what is anxiety? I've often heard people say, I'm not sure what anxiety is, because if you don't suffer from it, you don't, it's kind of hard to know anything about something that you don't know anything about, if that makes sense. But what I think will surprise a lot of people is when they hear anxiety explained in terms that they understand, they get that's what anxiety is, right? I know that feeling. Because I think if you took a course in anxiety, or if you went to school or college and learned about anxiety, you'd be told that it's, I'm not sure what you'd be told, but I would imagine you'd be told that it's, an unsettled feeling, an uneasy feeling, maybe a guilty feeling, even though you've nothing to feel guilty about. It's kind of hard to define, I think. At least I struggle. Maybe there is. Maybe if you look up the definition of anxiety in a dictionary, it would be laid bare and you'd understand perfectly what it was. I doubt it somehow, but I think when you explain it in real life terms, like what I ended up doing kind of by accident, I described it as, when you're driving along and you see flashing blue lights and you go, fuck, they got me for speeding or for whatever it is that you may or may not be doing. That general uneasy feeling of having flashing blue lights in your rear view mirror, that sickly feeling, that's anxiety. And again, the other example that I gave was in airport security. When you feel like you've got a kilo of cocaine on you going through security, like you're sweating and you're nervous, even though you're not doing anything wrong. You've every right in the world to be there, as much as the person on the other side of the scanner. You've every right and every reason to be there. You've no reason in the world to feel anxious about anything, but there it is, for whatever reason. You feel that sickly, uneasy feeling, that's anxiety. And I think school does a poor job at explaining everything, really. You're taught things in a way that it's accurate, but it's not told in stories. And I think that's what biblical stories originally were. They were to get across things that were kind of hard to explain very easily. So anxiety is a hard thing to explain. It's a hard thing to define, and a hard thing to explain to somebody who doesn't know what it is, what exactly it is. But if you give the story of those scenarios that are laid out, another one might be you've parked in a multi-story car park and you've done your bit of shopping, you've come back, you're in the car, you're going down the ramp to get out, there's a load of cars in front of you, a load of cars behind you, and you go, fuck! Where's me fucking tickets? Fuck! That's anxiety. Oh, it's there in my hand. Now, I think there's the difference between anxiety and, let's say the difference between an anxiety, sorry, let me start again. So that's anxiety, I think I've outlaid enough what anxiety is. You might have heard of people suffering an anxiety attack. Now, the flashing blue lights and the security and the where's me ticket, or let's say if you're at, another one would be at a concert. You've been queuing for the last hour to get in, you get to the door and it's like, oh, where's me ticket? And I've fucking lost my own train of thought. Just like that. Sigh. See, this is when you need a second person to go, Fran, you fucking dumb fuck, you were talking about anxiety attacks. There we go. So what an anxiety attack is when it's just that amplified. It's that anxious feeling, but amplified, and often for no fucking good reason. I had an anxiety attack sitting on the couch the other evening with herself. She was watching one of her soaps, and I was just making some notes, work-related stuff. I was kind of running the figures, and I've upped production significantly recently, and I was trying to get a grips of my cost of goods sold, and I came up with a figure, and I got this realization that increasing production had increased my costs to such a degree that I was actually losing money, and the fucking walls caved in on me a little, and I had an anxiety attack sitting beside her. And to cut a long story short, it turns out that I'd made a miscalculation. I had taken my bi-monthly ESB bill as a monthly ESB bill, so I had doubled my costs, and that had pushed me into a bracket whereby I was no longer profitable. So it was a nothing thing. It was basically just a clerical error, a mistake that I had made, no big deal. But in that moment of sitting there on the couch, I thought that the business that I was running, that was now employing people, was losing money by design. And I thought that was it, that I'd been caught out. I'd been finally found out. It had taken 3 years, but I finally made a balls of it. Simply wasn't the case, but I had an anxiety attack there and then on the couch. My breathing would have been more laboured. I couldn't think of anything else. I couldn't think really at all. All I could think of was, disaster, disaster, disaster. Warning, warning, warning. It's fucking horrible. So that's, I suppose, lays out kind of what an anxiety attack might be. The difference between that and a panic attack, or a difference worth mentioning, this isn't definitive now by any stretch of the imagination, but just to give you an idea of the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. If I had a panic attack, herself would have fucking known about it. Because you can hide an anxiety attack in a way that you can't hide a panic attack. I was in the middle of having a full-blown anxiety attack, and she asked me something, and I gave her some sort of an answer that was sufficient for her to, not probe any further. If I was having a panic attack, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Not that I wouldn't have been able to do it, I wouldn't have heard what she said in the fucking first place. And even if I did, I wouldn't have been able to do any more than mumble a response at best. So that's one difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. I think it's fair to say, at least in my experience, that a panic attack is an anxiety attack on steroids. So you're not worried about the security guy at the airport possibly finding the kilo of cocaine you don't have. He's found it. You've been caught. You're going to jail. Your kids are going to go into foster care where they'll probably get abused and that's the difference. So it's not a kind of a worrying feeling. It's fuck, life's over. It's up. Disaster. Full-blown fucking disaster. And if you can imagine somebody in that actual circumstances, let's face it, people do get caught going through security with kilos of cocaine on them. You can imagine how distraught that person would be. The realization of what they've done, the consequences of their actions, all the kind of the negative thinking and the negative positive feedback loop that would be implemented there, and the depression and the anxiety and all that good stuff, all compounding and compounding and compounding until you're just literally incapable of breathing properly. You're hyperventilating, you're in a full-blown panic, everything's collapsing around you. You can imagine what that must be like for somebody when they get caught. And a panic attack, for the most part, is more or less that experience when you haven't done anything. And it can be triggered by any number of things. It can be triggered by, you know, forgetting to carry the one or whatever mistake that I made. Now, on another day of the week or maybe another month of the year, when I'm eating right and I'm training and things are going a little bit better and I'm getting, you know, 4 hours continuous sleep a night, I get to the end of that equation and go, that can't be right. Hang on a second. You go back to the top and you go, I'm a dumbass. I overestimated my energy costs. That's where I went wrong. Oh yeah, no, grand, happy days. I'm still in the black all as well. But it's when you're on the fumes. It's when you're low on energy. It's when you haven't been training. It's when you're not firing on all cylinders. That's when you're, at the very least, more susceptible to not just full-blown anxiety attacks and panic attacks, but just regular old everyday anxiety and depression. Because things have much more of an impact when you're run down. So, again, just thinking out loud, a blind stranger walks by you in the street and goes, you're fucking useless. Look at the state of you. That has a certain impact. But if you were 4 and your dad said that to you, it's going to have 1,000 times the impact. And the analogy that I'm labouring to make there is a little thing like you ask your partner something and they go, oh, whatever. If you're running on fumes, that could be the equivalent of your dad, you know, saying, you're fucking useless. But if you were, you know, out training every day or every other day and, you know, business is going well and your relationships are going well and you're getting sleep and you're eating and you have plans for the future and all it's gravy, it's the equivalent of the stranger saying it to you. It means nothing. It doesn't hold the same weight. So the same instance will have 2 entirely different outcomes depending on you know, your state of mind, your state of being, your physical and mental fitness or health, all those kind of things. And I think that's the utility in analogies. And I think it's why I use them so much. To help me better understand everything, really. Because some things are so complex that you can't understand them. You know, you don't have the, like, how does a helicopter work? Like, where the fuck do you even start with that question? Do you start talking about, you know, lift and downforce and aerodynamics and torque and all that jazz? Or do you simply say that a helicopter is just a big engine with a fan stuck onto it? You know the way when you turn on a fan and the blades move, it blows air? Well, imagine a fan that's powered by an engine that's 10 times bigger than the engine in your car. Imagine the wind that would propel. And then you push that on the ground, and what happens? You go flying up. That's how a helicopter works. Okay. You can kind of get that. It kind of makes sense. And that's the beauty of analogies. So I made an analogy between an enormous car engine and a fan and a helicopter. And it just kind of works. You don't need a degree in aeronautical engineering to understand. You get it. You get the gist of it. You get the sentiment of it. And this is something that it's one of those recurring themes that I seem to have. There's a handful of them. Incremental steps is one. Done beats perfect is another. And I hope they don't become cliched. because the thing about cliches is, of course, typically enough, I can't think of one offhand, but cliches are generally nuggets of wisdom that we rhyme off. But because we just rhyme them off, they don't register as anything. They just register as like a proverb or something. Like, proverbs are deep and meaningful and massively beneficial. But if it's, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, like that's deep and meaningful. But you've heard it so many times, it just doesn't register. You don't get the sentiment or the gist of it anymore. It's something that's just kind of familiar. And I'd hate for my own little, oh God, dare I say, words of wisdom, but like, incremental steps and that kind of stuff. But I don't know what the overarching term for those things is. But I hope they aren't becoming cliched. And I think that there's great utility in revivifying cliches and modernizing old stories. So, like, I'd love to hear, again, I'm struggling to think of a concrete example here, but like the prodigal son, that story from the Bible, I'd love to see that remade, as let's say as a movie or something, or even a story in kind of podcast form or whatever, but put into kind of modern day context. So the son doesn't come home and the father doesn't, or the son does come home, it's part of the story, but the father doesn't slaughter the fatted calf. He fucking transfers 10 grand out of his current account. Do you know what kind of way? Like yeah, put it in real life terms. I remember in school, my teacher, he gave a great analogy in relation to learning maths, and he was saying that years previous there was a kid in his class who couldn't add for shit. Like, he was in 6th class and he barely had 2 + 2 = 4. But apparently his dad was a milkman and he used to help his dad on his milk rounds. And if you told the kid, you've got 2 milk bottles and you add 2 more milk bottles, how many milk bottles do you have? He'd look at you as if you had 2 heads, or if you were stupid or something, and say, 4 milk bottles, dumbass. But you ask him, if you've 2 helicopters and you add 2 more helicopters, how many helicopters do you have? He'd tell you he couldn't add, because it just wasn't in real world terms for him. And I think our education system generally doesn't do that. It doesn't put things into terms that people can understand. And I think part of my popularity, or not even popularity, but I think why people come back for more of what I'm saying is because I'm putting it in terms they can understand, in an accent that's familiar to them. I don't think if I had an Indian accent, for example, that I would have the same impact as I've had on a number of Irish people. Conversely, I don't think that my podcast as it stands will ever make much of an impact in India, for the same reason. And I think that's why, typically speaking, in Hollywood, say, the most famous actors don't really have accents. That's something that I've noticed over the years. They have it's almost like a generic accent. Like Tom Cruise, or even, I don't know, I'm actually that out of the loop, I can't, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, they might have distinctive voices, but they don't have accents. They have an English accent. It's almost like an all-encompassing accent. And I think you need that to be kind of universally appealing. Now, the last cunting thing I want to be is universally appealing. I want to hit home with people. I'd sooner have 10 people listening to me and getting real benefit from it than 100 million people listening and just, kind of enjoying it. And I think it's fucking gas. Like, this is what I've been missing from doing the solos. It's working shit out in my own head. I'm doing it for selfish reasons. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. This is for me, and if anybody else gets benefit from it, fucking brilliant. But it's just, I've found it so beneficial, and I think that I've really missed out from having these conversations, with myself/you. Because we all have this internal dialogue, but the problem with it is it's overwhelming. We're all like, people say, God, Franny, you're mad. You record solo podcasts. Like, that's such a talent, or it's something that I wouldn't be able to do myself. And you're like, what are you fucking talking about, man? You can't not do it. You do it 24 hours a fucking day. You literally do it in your sleep. But people do so much of it. It's one of those weird things that you do so much of it that you don't even notice it. It's like breathing. Like, you talk to yourself like you breathe. You're never really conscious of it, but you're doing it relentlessly. And some people's conversations in their own heads are better than others. Like the conversation that I'm having with my own head and that you're privy to here now, what I'm having here now is a constructive conversation. And you'll thank me for not uploading the not so constructive ones. You'll thank me for not uploading the ones when I think I'm a piece of shit and I'm a terrible dad and herself would be better off without me, or maybe the world would be better off without me, because I have those thoughts. I've been down deep and dark enough holes, and thankfully kind of come out the other side the better for it, to be able to recognise really, really, really poisonous thoughts that come to mind. And like I said before, when you're training and when you're eating right and when your relationships are good and everything's going well, A, you don't tend to have those kind of toxic thoughts, and B, when you do, they don't last as long, they're not as intense. You can recognise them and you can kind of go, Jesus, maybe I need to go for a fucking run, or maybe I need to just turn my phone off and watch some funny videos on YouTube for half an hour and just give myself 5 fucking minutes peace, because I'm just overwhelmed with everything that's going on around me, and maybe I just need to take a minute to chill the fuck out and not be constantly burning the candle at both ends. But it's very hard to see that when you're in the trenches. And on that somewhat philosophically and waffly note, that's 2 for one day. I'm not going to ruin it, and I'll chat to you soon. But before I let you go, I'd just like to remind everybody that this episode and all the episodes on YouTube have been brought to you by past guest and friend of the show, Pat McKeown. Pat is very similar to myself insofar as that he's long had an interest in the mind, and more specifically the brain, and how they both interact, to such an extent that he went and spent 4 years getting a degree in neuroscience, and then spent a further year in getting a master's in psychology. Now, what he's done is pretty fucking cool. He's after setting up his own YouTube channel. It's called Pat Psychology Masters, and there's a link in the description. Now, what he's done here is he's uploaded all the best bits that he's learned over the last 5 years and put them into short, plain English, easy to understand YouTube videos for the likes of myself. His YouTube channel has been a massive resource for me in understanding both my mind and the mind of others. So hit up Pat Psychology Masters YouTube channel, subscribe, give it a like and a comment and a share. All that kind of stuff helps, and I'll chat to you soon.